I wasn't working out to feel good or be healthy. I was doing it to earn the right to be found attractive. Hi everyone, I'm Lisa, and welcome back to Self-Awareness Sucks, the podcast where I get uncomfortably honest about what it actually looks like to try and grow as a person. And spoiler, it sucks. But it also kind of doesn't. It's a whole thing. Now, if you've been following along, you might have noticed that with this new episode comes a bit of a new look. And if you're listening in the future, you don't need to worry about what it used to look like. Just know that I had a bit of a glow up, and that is with a huge thanks to my friend Farah, who helped brand everything and really bring it all to life. I'm so happy with how it all looks, and I just wanted to acknowledge that properly. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And with today's episode, I also want to introduce something new. From here onwards, I'm going to be including a segment called Uncomfortably Honest. And the idea is simple. It's just me saying the thing I probably would have softened or talked around or buried in a disclaimer a few sentences ago, and just saying the thing that's a bit harder to actually admit to out loud. Because I think that's kind of the whole point of this podcast, and I want to make sure I'm actually doing it rather than just talking about doing it. So keep an ear out for that later in the episode. And today's topic is one that I've been sitting with for a little while, so I can only apologise for the wait, but it is quite a personal one and also touches on some things I think a lot of people might carry around quietly. We are, of course, talking about self-awareness in the body, specifically my relationship with my skin and my relationship with exercise and fitness, and the moment I realised that the patterns I had in one area were showing up in the other two. I did touch on both of these things briefly in episode 3 when I was talking about the moment I realised no one was coming to do the work for me. But this episode goes a lot deeper. So if you have heard episode 3, some of this will feel familiar, but I promise there's a lot more to it than I covered there. Before we get into it, as usual, I just want to say I'm not a psychologist, a therapist, or a medical professional, and I'm not claiming to be. I'm not here to give advice or a diagnosis. Everything I share in this podcast is based on my own experiences, thoughts, and observations. So please take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and if you are struggling with anything I mention, please do reach out to a qualified professional or at least someone you trust. On a specific note for this episode, we are going to be talking about body image, appearance, skin, and mentioning skin picking, and exercise, and the complicated feelings that can get wrapped up in all of those things. So I just wanted to be upfront about that because I know that these topics can be sensitive and maybe even triggering for some. So if any of that feels like too much today, that is completely okay. I completely understand. Come back if or when you're ready, or skip this one entirely. I'll still be here. But if you are in a place where you want to hear it, I hope some of what I share today resonates with you in a helpful way. Okay, let's get into it. So, I want to start with skin, because in a lot of ways, that's where this whole episode begins. Growing up, I was very lucky and actually had really clear skin as a teenager. And I know that's not a universally relatable experience, and a lot of people had the opposite, but for me, skin just wasn't something I thought about very much. It was fine. I washed my face, did very minimal skincare, and got on with my life. And that was kind of the extent of my whole routine. But this was also in an era when the stereotype was that when you got into your teenage years, you'd be spotty, and that was the norm. But that just wasn't the case for me. But then at some point, and I'd say it was a gradual shift rather than something that happened overnight, my skin started to change. I started getting breakouts. And it wasn't just normal spots either, but cystic acne. The kind that lives under the skin and is painful and lingers, and honestly is really hard to deal with both physically and emotionally. And I didn't have the knowledge or tools to manage it at the time either. And at one point, I thought my skin couldn't possibly get any worse. But then the pandemic happened. And I don't think I need to explain to anyone what the pandemic did to a lot of people's skin or body or mindset, whether it was stress or the lifestyle changes or the masks or the fact that our routines completely fell apart. But my skin got significantly worse during that period. And I remember feeling quite powerless about it because on top of everything else that was happening in the world, I was also dealing with something that was very visible and very much on my face. So I was constantly seeing it. But here's the thing about skin though, and I think this is something people don't always talk about enough. Because it's not just about the skin. It's about how you feel when walking into a room. It's about whether you want someone to look at you. It's about whether you feel like yourself. And for me, at that point in my life, my appearance felt incredibly tied to my sense of worth. Not in a way that I would have articulated at the time. I don't think I even really knew that's what was happening. But looking back, I can see it clearly now. And I think to understand why that feeling was so loud, I need to go back even further because this didn't really start with the pandemic. It started much earlier than that. Growing up in the 2000s and watching Disney Channel and Nickelodeon, there was a very consistent message being reinforced about what you're supposed to look like. And not even just those two channels, it was pretty much all the films and all the media in the 2000s, maybe even later than that, and maybe even before that. But you were supposed to be slim and have clear skin and conventionally attractive in a very specific, very narrow way. And it wasn't really subtle. There were entire storylines built around a character getting a spot and treating it like the most catastrophic thing that had ever happened to them. And so the message was clear. Blemishes were shameful. Visible imperfections were problems to be solved or hidden or fixed. And I even remember a specific episode of That's So Raven where Raven had designed a dress and she was told she couldn't model her own design because of what she looked like, which specifically in the episode was because of her race and I believe her size as well. And so even as a kid, something about that registered. Not fully, not consciously. I wasn't aware that I was registering it, but it definitely went in and lodged itself in there. But then going back to the 2000s, there was a broader cultural context during that period. You know, heroin chic, the low-rise jeans, the idea that being visibly extremely thin was not just desirable, but aspirational. And that was the standard being circulated everywhere. Magazines, TV, even in music videos. And I was absorbing all of it. And then on top of that, there was this constant narrative that having a boyfriend was the goal. And this was also largely perpetuated by those TV shows on Disney Channel and Nickelodeon and all the films that we used to watch back then. But I can't say that this goal was the same for guys either. But certainly from my perspective, it felt like there was a pressure to be in a relationship. Everything we watched was constructed around popularity, desirability, and the eligibility of your personality. Basically, were you cool enough to be socially accepted? But there was also the idea that you had to look a certain way to be desirable. That if you didn't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, something was wrong with you. But you also couldn't be too weird, too much, too anything, or you'd never get one. It was this impossible paradox that I couldn't resolve, and I carried it around for years without ever quite giving it a name. And it was actually insanity that this was a priority at the age of, I think, 7 years old and onwards. We had no business worrying about this as children. Now, obviously, I can't say that it was the same for all 7-year-olds around the world, but this was certainly what I observed in my school and my social circle. And my generation as well, actually. But for me personally, the confusing part was that I was being told contradictory things constantly. And these were obviously, this was my formative years, so things that I was being told then were cementing themselves in my brain. My family and my friends would be telling me that I was pretty and that I was smart and I was a good person. And then at school, I was being called fat and ugly and weird by boys specifically. And none of it made sense to me, because I always considered myself a nice person. So I didn't understand why this was happening, and I didn't understand why I was being targeted in such a way when I hadn't done anything to anyone. And those messages that stuck weren't the kind ones. They were the ones that confirmed what the TV and the magazines were already suggesting, that I wasn't quite right and that I didn't fit in. But then, fast forward, there was also a period where there was a very specific, very dominant beauty standard being circulated everywhere online. If you're on social media or watching YouTube between about 2016 and 2018, and maybe even 2019, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The cut crease eyeshadow, the laminated, almost architectural eyebrows, the sharp eyeliner, the full, flawless airbrushed base with the contour and the highlight, with everything perfectly blended, perfectly placed, perfectly a lot. And I was in that world. I was consuming that content. I was attempting that makeup, and there was this unspoken rule, I think, that this was the standard, that this was what looking good meant. And when I couldn't achieve it, when my skin wasn't playing ball, when the base didn't sit right, and when I didn't look like those photos and those videos, I genuinely, sadly, felt like I was failing. Not just at makeup, but at something bigger. I felt like I was failing at being attractive and at being desirable and at being someone worth looking at. And that is so sad to say out loud, but that's genuinely where I was at in the 2010s. And I need to give some broader context to where all of that pressure was coming from, because I've been thinking about this a lot recently. But before I do get into this next part, I just want to flag something. I'm going to mention race specifically, and I want to be clear about why. It's not to make a sweeping statement about anyone's culture or experience. I, of course, can only speak to what I've observed and what I've experienced myself. But the reason it's relevant will make sense in a second. I was scrolling TikTok the other day, and a video came up of a black woman talking about the white female beauty standard. and she seemed genuinely confused and almost even shocked at the level at which we consider someone slim. As I was reading through the comments, people started naming specific female celebrities. Sabrina Carpenter, Tate McRae, Lola Tongue, Zara Larsson. Women who have apparently been called fat online. Maybe even not just online, but I'm not sure. And the creator was responding in disbelief. And so were other people in the comments, both black and white women, from what I could see. Because these celebrity women, they are, by any reasonable measure, slim and healthy. And yet the opposite is being said about them. And then I saw another video, not long after that one, also from a black woman, talking about how within black culture, there's more space for varying expressions of beauty, that there's more individuality and more acceptance of different body types. Whereas the white female beauty standard, as she described it, seems to demand that everyone essentially look the same. Now, I'm not in a position to speak on every culture or every experience and if this is a universal observational feeling about these different cultures. Again, I can only speak to what I've observed. But what struck me was the genuine surprise on their part, and also actually on my part, that there is this disconnect between what one culture considers normal and what another has been told is the standard. And what hit me watching those videos wasn't just the shock in the comments. It was also my realization that I had never even considered that beauty standards might differ across cultures. I think I just latently assumed that the standard I grew up with and the one I was measuring myself against was just universal. That everyone, everywhere was working from the same checklist. And they're not. They never were. I just didn't know that because my experience had been so insular that I never had reason to question it. But I can speak on this to an extent from my own background as well. I'm half Russian, and there is a very specific relationship with body size in Eastern European culture that I grew up around. Comments about weight happen often and consistently, not just in family settings, but in friendship groups too. I've seen it firsthand, and I've spoken to other Eastern European women who have said the same thing, that anything to do with how you look and your size and your weight comes up almost immediately when you see whoever it is that you're seeing. And that it's a recurring topic of conversation. And that being a certain size is treated as something you should actively be managing at all times. But there is an irony in that, because Russian food, the food that I grew up eating and genuinely love, is not light food. It's hearty. It's things like dumplings and pies and rich salads and there's always a lot of meat and dough, because it's food that's meant to keep you going and is tied to a culture of comfort and community. And yet the expectation around how your body should look sits completely at odds with that, which to me suggests that the standard was never really about health or how you live. It was purely about appearance and what you're supposed to look like, regardless of anything else. So the standard I was measuring myself against wasn't universal. It wasn't neutral. It was a very specific, very narrow, culturally constructed idea of what a woman's body should look like. And I had absorbed it completely from multiple directions at once without ever stopping to ask where it came from or whether it was even real. So fast forward to more recently, I decided to do something about my skin in a more active, informed way, and part of that was microneedling. For anyone who doesn't know what microneedling is, it's a skincare treatment where teeny tiny needles are used to create controlled micro-injuries in the skin, which then triggers the skin's natural healing response. It encourages collagen production, which can help with texture and scarring and pigmentation and overall skin quality. It's not a one and done thing. You typically need a course of treatments and there's some recovery time involved. But the results can be really significant, and I've genuinely seen a big change in my own skin. And I actually had my most recent checkup appointment a few days ago, maybe even over a week ago now. And I've shared the before and after pictures and what I specifically had done on TikTok because I wanted to just share some information about it in case anyone's curious. But I also think there's something important about being visible about this kind of thing. I think sometimes skin treatments can feel like a bit of a secret you're supposed to keep, and like you're supposed to just magically appear with better skin and not talk about what got you there. And I don't really want to do that. Not anymore. Because the truth is, the journey to this point, deciding to take my skin seriously, finding treatments that actually work, and accepting help rather than obsessing or giving up, that journey is connected to everything else I've been learning about myself. Which brings me to the other side of this episode. So let's talk about fitness, because this is where the pattern really became visible to me. My relationship with exercise has not always been healthy. Not dangerous, just want to be clear, but not healthy either. And for a long time, it looked like this. I would get motivated, something would click, some New Year's energy or a moment of feeling like I needed to make a change, and I would go in hard. I'm talking an hour of working out, maybe more, every single time. Fully committed, tracking everything, pushing through, doing the absolute most. And then this would only last about 2 weeks. And I'd completely fall off because I'd be exhausted and my body would be tired and my motivation would be completely gone, and I'd go from doing everything to doing nothing. And the doing nothing phase would last significantly longer than the doing everything phase. Sound familiar to anyone? And here's the thing, I would do the same thing with my skin. I would get into a phase of feeling like I needed to fix it, and I would overload my routine with everything I could think of. Face masks, retinol, the light therapy masks that you wear around on your face for about 30 minutes, high frequency ones, blackhead patches, exfoliants, scrubs, every product, every tool, every treatment layered on top of each other all at once because I wanted results and I wanted them instantly. And then my skin would only get worse. Because that's just what happens when you throw too many active ingredients at your skin at once. It gets overwhelmed and it reacts. And then I would get confused and frustrated, and I'd either swing back into obsessively trying or just give up entirely. And most of the time when I would say when I leave my skin alone and just stick to my routine and go back to the basics, that's when my skin is at its calmest. But there was another layer that I want to be really honest about. When I was stressed or feeling out of control, I would turn to skin picking. Specifically, this idea that if I could just get rid of this spot, this blackhead, this sebaceous filament, then my skin would be perfect. But picking would only irritate my skin and make it more inflamed, which would in turn make it worse, which would then make me more stressed, and I would pick even more. And it was a cycle that only ever escalated and never resolved itself. So the only thing that truly broke that cycle was actually the microneedling, because after the treatment, I was not allowed to touch my face. I could only use the products I was given. So that forced abstinence and that complete removal of the option to touch my face broke the picking habit by force. But it also gave me the space to notice what the picking was actually about, because it wasn't really about skincare. It was about control. When everything else felt chaotic or overwhelming, my skin felt like something I could manage. Except ironically, I couldn't. And the trying to manage was making everything worse. But this was also tied to wanting that flawless base, because I wanted to get rid of the spots so badly and get to that flawless base quickly that I actually only made it worse for myself. So it was this really toxic and painful cycle that I was stuck in that was actually delaying me from getting to the goal that I wanted. But the pattern was identical across all of it. In fitness, in skincare, in the picking, it would be all in, burn out, bail. Or grasp of control, lose it, spiral. Rinse and repeat. And I think the moment of actual self-awareness, the thing that changed things for me, was when I started to notice that these weren't separate problems. The boom and bust cycle with fitness, the all or nothing with skin, the picking when I felt out of control, the pressure I was putting on my appearance, it wasn't just happening in one area of my life. It had become my default way of operating, and it was showing up everywhere. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Which, if you listen to the very first episode, is kind of the whole thesis of this podcast. Because that's what self-awareness does. It makes things visible that you can't then make invisible again. And that's the specific way self-awareness sucks here. Because now I call myself out on it. Every time I feel that pull towards going all in, or towards giving up entirely, or towards picking at something I should leave alone, I know what it is. I know where it's coming from, and I can see the pattern in real time. And it's a genuinely good thing, but it also means I can't just do it mindlessly anymore. I can't let the all or nothing take over without knowing that I'm letting it. And sometimes, honestly, that's its own kind of exhausting. And why self-awareness really is a blessing and a curse. And I want to be, as always, honest about why that feeling was so loud for me specifically. Because I think it gets to something quite particular. Up until 2022, I had never really had what I'd describe as solid data that I was desirable. I'd dated people, but I'd never been in a relationship. I didn't get into my first relationship until 2022. And I think that there's a huge difference between going on dates and feeling genuinely chosen, feeling like someone actually wants to be with you specifically. And I hadn't had that, not in a way that really stuck with me. And I actually heard someone on TikTok describe it in a way that really resonated with me. She talked about not having the data. And that phrase really stuck with me because it's so accurate. When you don't have that data, you end up looking for other things to fill that gap. And you might even start trying to build a case for yourself And for me, a huge part of that case was my appearance. And I'm aware that a lot of these realizations seem to happen when I'm scrolling TikTok. Make of that what you will. But I think that maybe that says less about the app and more about the fact that I'm actively paying attention now in a way that I wasn't before. Because I think that the content was probably always there. It's just that now I'm noticing it differently. If I could just look a certain way, this was my mindset back in the day. If I could just look a certain way, if my skin was clear, if my makeup was right, if my body looked a certain way, then maybe I'd be desirable. Then maybe I'd be eligible, if that makes sense. It was like I was trying to meet some invisible checklist before I was allowed to take up space in that way. And that meant that when my appearance wasn't what I thought it needed to be, I would just shut down. I'd completely withdraw. I'd cancel plans or just say no to them in their entirety. Or if I did go out, I'd spend the whole time feeling really self-conscious and completely disconnected. And I wasn't fully present because part of me was too busy managing how I thought I looked and whether people were noticing. But none of that, and I want to be really clear about this, is actually true. There is and there was no checklist. The people around me were not and do not now sit there and evaluate my skin. It was just because I was aware of it that I thought other people were. I was projecting that perception. They aren't thinking about it. They're most of the time probably too focused on the conversation that they're having. But that's the thing about this kind of internal narrative. It doesn't really care about what feels true or what is true. It's just, you just carry it around and that's how you feel and it is what it is. And this does connect back to something I talked about in episode 6, the problem with being perceived, where I got into how we can absorb other people's perceptions of us and start living inside them without even realising it. Even if it's a completely fabricated perception that we've concocted ourselves. But I think that this is, what I've been talking about is the same thing and just it's playing out in a different arena. I had absorbed this idea of what I was supposed to look like and I was living inside it as if it were a fact. So, this episode's Uncomfortably Honest is that for a long time, I wasn't working out to feel good or be healthy. Or skin. I wasn't doing skincare and applying makeup to just feel good for myself. I was doing it to earn the right to be found attractive. And I didn't even fully admit that to myself until I actually started looking at why I kept stopping. It wasn't discipline I was lacking. It was the right reason for doing it all in the first place. And that's where the shift started. With exercise, I started asking myself, why am I doing this? Like, genuinely, why? And once I was honest about the answer, I could start building something different. I work out now because I want to be stronger, because I've had injuries in the past and I want to prevent more of them, and because I sleep better when I move my body regularly, and because it helps me manage my mental health and I have more energy and I just feel better overall. And because I like feeling capable in my own body and I like noticing what it can do, not just what it looks like. And because of that, I've actually stuck to it and I've had a consistent supply of motivation. But I've not stuck to it perfectly. This isn't a transformation story where everything clicked and now I never miss a workout. But I am consistent in a way I never was before, because this motivation is coming from inside rather than from trying to meet an external standard. And with my skin, it's the same shift. I'm not trying to fix my skin to earn something. I'm looking after it because it's part of looking after myself. I now adjust my routine based on what my skin actually needs, rather than layering everything on it at once because I'm panicking. And I got treatments like microneedling because they've made me feel more comfortable in my skin, not because I'm trying to become a different person or become someone more deserving of being looked at. But the picking, I still catch myself sometimes. But now when I notice the urge, I try to ask what's actually going on. What am I feeling out of control about? Because it was never really about my skin. It was about everything else. So what's the actual lesson here? If I had to distill this whole episode down to one thing, it would probably be this. The habits and patterns you have in one area of your life are almost certainly showing up in other areas too. And the motivation underneath those habits matters just as much as the habits themselves. You can do all the right things, exercise regularly, follow a skincare routine, eat well, whatever it is, and still be doing them from a place of trying to earn something or prove something or fix something that isn't actually broken. And when that's the driving force, it usually ends up being unsustainable, because you'll never quite reach whatever invisible standard you set for yourself. The shift for me has been learning to do things because they're good for me. Full stop. Not because they'll make me more worthy of love or more attractive to someone specific or more acceptable by some standard I absorbed from social media or from culture or from anywhere else. Just because I deserve to feel good in my body. And these things help me do that. And that's it. That's the whole thing. And I know that's easier said than done. I know that some of what I talked about today, the desirability piece, the body image piece, runs really deep for a lot of us. And this isn't me saying I figured it all out, because I absolutely haven't. I still have days where I look in the mirror and that old voice pipes up and those comments from bullies whisper in the back of my mind. And I still have moments where I want to fix things for the wrong reasons. But the difference now is that I notice it. I'm aware of it. And that awareness, even when it's uncomfortable, maybe especially when it's uncomfortable, is the thing that makes it possible to choose differently. And connecting this back to episode 4, free will is reason enough, the shift isn't just about motivation. It's about permission. Giving myself permission to look after my body because I want to, not because I owe it to anyone or because I'm trying to earn my place somewhere. And that reframe changed everything. Okay, so that's self-awareness in the body. I hope something in there resonated with you, even a little bit. And there are so many questions I could leave you with, but I think I'll just leave you with 2. Is there something your body has been trying to tell you that you've been too busy fixing to actually hear? And what's one standard you absorbed growing up that you never really questioned? And does it really belong to you? As I mentioned, I've shared my microneedling on my TikTok, and I'm also going to be talking more about my skin journey in general, maybe even my fitness journey. So if you want to see that side of things visually, you can come and find me there. My username is Lisa Jo Kosh. And if this episode hit home for you in any way, I'd genuinely love to hear about it. You can reach me on socials, and as always, if you are enjoying the podcast, sharing it or leaving a review genuinely helps more people find it, which really means a lot to me. Take care of yourselves, and remember, self-awareness sucks, but so does not having it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!